Hello, this is Mike Shearer, Executive Editor of the Columbus Dispatch. I'm here for another edition of From the Editor, our podcast talking about the cover stories in the Sunday Columbus Dispatch. And with me this week is Danae King, who is one of our reporters who's worked on a piece that's publishing on Sunday about universal basic income. So we'll talk about that here a little bit. Welcome, Danae.
Thanks for having me.
And first, I've been kind of starting out by asking everybody, just about your beat and what you do and kind of what your typical week's like as a reporter here at the Dispatch.
Yeah, so my beat is underserved communities, which kind of is a catch-all for a lot of different people and things going on. So I cover all kinds of communities, from those who are impoverished to veterans, LGBTQ people. I do some affordable housing work. So my weeks are mostly focused on really finding real people who are affected by things. It's one thing to tell what's going on, but it's quite another to find the real people behind the story who are really suffering from policies or changes. So that's really my typical week, is trying to gain trust of people and find those people who will tell me their story.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so this week's story is about universal basic income, which we'll explain here in a moment. And this came about because we did some stories last year about two new programs that are being launched in Columbus. And we saw huge reader interest in these stories online. And our metrics, we know how long people read stories and how often they read stories. So we thought, well, this topic deserves more study than people are really interested in this. We're not sure if it's people who think it's a great idea or those who are concerned about it and disagree with the policy. But so we thought we'd still dive in and talk about what is universal basic income. So we'll start there. What is UBI? What does it mean?
Yeah, so universal basic income is this idea of no strings attached cash payments. So they're direct cash payments to people. Most programs that are piloting them and have existed are like $500 to $1,000 a month for about a year or so. And this concept is actually like as old as our democracy. So it started, Thomas Paine kind of had this idea initially, and it's always been this bipartisan concept. It's really changed over time. Nixon tried a few pilots, and then it gained popularity again about 10 years ago when Dolly Parton gave cash payments to some victims of a fire. And, the experts I talked to said these programs are really popular now. They went from just 3 pilots in the United States in 2018 to more than 150 today, including the 2 in Columbus. And they're popular now because there's just so much in economic inequality going on and wealth gaps. So
yeah, your story talks about that the economic inequality is at an all-time high in that person's opinion.
Right.
And that's why you're seeing people trying to figure out how to help people out more.
Yeah, and the kind of novel thing about these is, there's all kinds of entitlement programs and programs for people who are impoverished, but this is, like I said, no strings attached, and people can use it the way they think is best for there's might be rental assistance programs, but there's no money if your car breaks down. So this is kind of that idea of, people can use it the way that's best for them.
Okay, so it also was popularized during Andrew Yang's presidential run. And my memory tells me that when the child tax credit was in place there that one summer a few years ago during the Biden stimulus plans, there was a lot of, that was part of that concept too, was getting people with kids more money that as a child tax credit they could use any way they wanted to.
Yeah, that popularized it too, and that's actually the basis of kind of one of these local programs. Is there's 32 mothers who are part of a local collective who they're single mothers, and they're getting $500 a month for 12 months as part of one of these programs. And you see in the story that there's all different ways they'll use this money, but it's really important because it allows them to enroll their kids in extracurricular activities that they might not have otherwise been able to afford and things like that. So yeah, these different concepts kind of came about and popularized this no strings attached approach.
So you and I were we had an editorial board meeting on Friday with our last week with the local food bank leaders, and they described a situation now where the need for food is higher than it was even during the onset of COVID, which seems hard to fathom given the lines and the situation we had 5 years ago right now. They also described that most of their clients are working, people who are working. So this story also kind of gets in that space of the people who are struggling to make ends meet for whatever reason. Is that kind of what you encountered in doing this?
Yeah, definitely. One of the people I talked to was like, these aren't lazy people. Most of the people who are in need and who are getting these benefits, this universal basic income pilots, are people who are working one or multiple jobs. You know, the woman who really kind of headlines the story, she works for the county, for Franklin County, and has a master's degree.
Yeah, that surprised me.
Yeah, and she goes to the food pantry 3 times a week because she can't support her family on what she makes.
So that's Jasmine Wooten, is that how you pronounce her name? Okay, so she is the lead of your story this week, yes. So she's 35, as you said, worked for the county. So she has health insurance. And she can pay her bills despite living paycheck to paycheck, but still has to go to the food pantry 3 times a week to get food for her family.
And she's got 2 children.
Wow. And then there's, in your story, nearly 40% of all Franklin County residents couldn't afford essentials like food, housing, childcare, transportation, healthcare in 2022. And then down lower it talks about 35% of local residents living in poverty are employed.
Right.
So this is that kind of explains where the UBI comes in and where people see giving someone $500 a month can really make a difference.
Yeah, and it's this, mostly we think of people in need who are people who aren't working for whatever reason, but this, I think, really shows that it is people who might be fully employed, who are also in need because of income inequality. There's also a study that one of the Federal Reserves did about how most Americans can't afford like a $400 emergency. So that kind of really shows just how strained the economy and inflation and rising prices of everything have made families who, are working hard and still can't make ends meet.
So let's talk about these programs. There's 2 programs operating right now, one through the county and one through the city. Is that right?
Yeah, so the county supports the one that I talked about before with single mothers,
okay.
And they support that through their Rise Together Innovation Institute. And it's also funded by an organization called Up Together that does these kinds of programs throughout the country. And then the city's program is a little bit different because these are universal basic income concepts. It's not exactly UBI because there are strings to some of these programs. So the strings to the city's program, which is the Economic Mobility Accelerator Program, is that you have to be enrolled in one of 6 existing financial literacy or workforce development programs. So those are things like Albus House and Goodwill, or Albus, not Albus House. Albus and Goodwill have those programs. And so 200 people who are enrolled in those are getting $500 a month for 2 years. And that started in March. And that's from $2.5 million of city funding.
Okay. So these programs do have conditions for enrollment, but the money you receive is you can spend on car repair or put in your savings account or
right. You can spend the money however you want. There's just it's not technically universal basic income because it's not universal, but also you have to be
most importantly not universal,
right?
Not everybody, yeah.
But also you have to be in one of these programs for the city program. So these pilots, they're all across the country. Like I said, there's 150 of them, and how they work kind of differ from city to city.
Okay, so the people you spoke to who are for this and support this concept, what are their arguments for why it's needed?
Yeah, so the city and county are two of the places that I talked to about supporting this, which they obviously do. And so they talk a lot about how, giving this money can not only lift people out of poverty, give them some choices and empower them, but it can also help the broader community. So Commissioner Kevin Boyce talks a lot about how you see cranes in the sky and orange barrels on the street, but not everybody is growing as Columbus grows. There are people left behind. So his point is that this can help those people left behind. And one of the ways that can happen is when you have this extra money, it offers some breathing room. There's not as much stress and anxiety that these families are facing, wondering maybe where their next meal will come from, or how they're going to pay their bills. And eventually the hope is that they'll be able to save or invest some of that money. It'll be enough that they not only get that breathing room mentally, but financially.
Okay. Now, there are those who disagree with this concept, as we know. You spoke to the Buckeye Institute, which is a conservative kind of think tank here in Ohio. And what was the main concern about programs like this? Yeah,
so the gentleman I spoke to there talked a little bit about a study that came out about a program that gave $1,000 a month to some individuals, and it showed that their work hours reduced. Now, when you look into the study, it shows that they just reduced among participants 1 to 2 hours a week. So not a ton, but that was spent on leisure time. And so his argument was, that concept is flawed. If they're reducing their work hours, this money allows people to work less. And so the argument is job skills programs are a better and more proven investment than something like, no strings attached cash. Advocates on the other side of that say, that's 1 to 2 hours these people might get to spend with their kids and their family.
Yeah, recreation is not a bad thing.
Right. And it can make you more productive at work.
But there is some evidence to back that up from what happened during the pandemic when all the money was available to people, and then suddenly it was hard to find employees for jobs. And there is some, at least anecdotal evidence to back that concern up at some point.
Yeah, and that's the thing, $500 a month or even $1,000 a month isn't enough for most people to quit their job. So that can happen. I think the programs we have locally especially aren't really extreme enough to allow people to just live on this money.
Yeah. No, you can't live on $500 a month in
right.
Columbus, Ohio. Doesn't even cover rent or begin to cover rent or a house payment, whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I think that one of the people you spoke to here talks about how working less is not bad, but it actually helps improve your lives, as you mentioned a minute ago. But she really disagreed with his concern, saying that there might be a slight reduction, but people are better off and have time with their families, etc. So,
right, it's that well-being piece.
Okay. So what is next for these programs? And these are both 1-year tests for these folks?
The cities is 2 years.
2 years, okay.
And county-supported one is 1 year. And they're both being studied as pilots. So this is happening all across the country, and there's research institutes. Like one of the women I talked to is with a research institute who are studying these programs, and the idea is to see, especially locally, how they work in Columbus. Are they helping people? Are they worth the investment? And if anything does, what needs to change to make them better in the future? So the city program, they want to show if this can work. And if it can, they're hoping that, other organizations will kind of take up the baton and do these programs. They're kind of creating a model for how to do it in the city. The county program, they want to do again next year, in the same way. They're pilots, but, that one for sure, they're hoping to do again.
But the people who are receiving money this year, is that expected to continue next year at the same or a lower level or no level?
No, so it would be new people. So It's just, for the people who receive it now, they get it for that time period, and then that's it.
So basically it's $6,000, is that right? Months, right? I believe, over 12 months that you have to get your life in better shape and move forward.
Right, for the one. And then the other one is $12,000 over 2 years.
2 years, okay.
Yeah.
Same concept. Okay. All right. Well, Danae, thank you so much for taking time with us today to explain your story. It'll be online on dispatch.com this Sunday and in print at the same time. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.